The first days after the loss were a blur. Thomas often stayed alone, avoiding friends and loud gatherings. He felt cut off from the world, feeling that he could no longer be the same as before. But after a few weeks, he begins to try to go outside, to play with friends, albeit with great self-doubt. His smile, which was so weak in the morning, begins to appear again, although not as bright as before. Thomas tries to find support in his friends, Lucas, Henry, and Michael. They do not mention the loss, they just continue to play together, trying to return a sense of familiarity to him. However, when he returns home, he feels empty, realizing that his father is no longer there. Sometimes he comes to his mother when she is cooking or just sits in silence, trying to accept the new reality. Thomas does not say much, but in his eyes you can see the same pain that still haunts him. And although he wants to be strong, he often asks questions he doesn't have the strength to answer. How will I live without him? For Martha, this month was a time of constant struggle. She had to be strong not only for herself, but also for her son, who was suffering from the loss of his father. For the first few weeks, she tried to maintain a normal rhythm, trying to organize her life, work and do household chores. But every time her gaze stopped on the empty space at the table or on George's clothes, the pain returned. Martha often could not sleep at night, experiencing new waves of sadness. She did not have the strength to decide how to move on. But after a while, watching Thomas, she understands that she needs to start moving forward not only for him, but also for herself. She begins to seek support from her friends, trying to find a way to work with her own pain. She begins to turn to a psychologist to understand how to live on, and gradually learns to work with grief. Some time had passed since the loss of George, and Thomas had slowly begun to adjust to his new reality. However, the pain remained with him, although it gradually became less noticeable. His friends Lucas, Henry, and Michael did not force him to forget the pain, but they created space for Thomas to simply be a child. They were there when he was struggling and when he needed support, but they also tried to show him that it was possible to return to the joys of life. One day they gathered again on the playground. At first Thomas hesitated. He was not sure if he was ready to play again like before. But when he saw Lucas running past him with the ball and exclaiming, "Have you completely forgotten how to play?" a smile unwittingly spread across his face. "I'm not that old," Thomas replied and, although slightly hesitant, picked up the ball. The friends began to play, laughing and running around the playground. Henry joked and laughed so loudly that even the neighborhood kids noticed them. Michael tried to show Thomas new tricks with the ball, but he kept missing. Thomas looked at his friends and felt his pain begin to subside along with them. He didn't think about the loss. His heart beat in time with the game, and he just enjoyed the moment. He began to laugh more, although it wasn't like before. But this laughter was real, he could feel it. Lucas walked up to him and threw the ball. "So, are you a real player or not?" Thomas picked up the ball and hit the ground with it, launching it towards Lucas. They started running again, chasing the ball around the court, falling on each other with laughter. He felt a freedom that he hadn't felt just a few days ago. And even though everything wasn't like before, he still found joy in simple things. The friends didn't mention their father, and it wasn't important. They were just together, sharing small joys, laughing about how one of them tripped while trying to score a goal. Thomas understood that even in this new world there was a place for laughter and play. As the sun began to set and the field emptied, Thomas, along with his friends, sat on a bench and looked up at the sky. They were still joking and laughing, discussing their sports achievements. Thomas looked at them quietly, and although his heart was still heavy, he knew that these moments with his friends were important. They couldn't take away the pain, but they could help him get back to life. And in that he found some peace. "Thank you," he said, smiling softly. Lucas nodded, and Henry added, "Always, Thomas. Always." This day was another small step in the process of recovery. Thomas realized that things could not be the same as before, but he was able to find moments of joy with his friends, even if they could not forget the pain that remained. During the month after losing George, Thomas begins to discover new layers of pain and acceptance. At first, he avoids talking about his father, feeling that it will only increase the pain. But over time, with his mother's support, he gradually discovers the importance of memory. They begin to remember George often, sitting at the dinner table in the evenings or during quiet walks. Martha notices that Thomas has become more open to these conversations. And although his voice sometimes breaks with sadness, you can see how his heart fills with warmth when he remembers the fun times with his father. They laugh at the way George usually jokes, even when the situation is serious. Thomas begins to remember not only the difficult times when his father is sick, but also the happy days, when they went fishing together, when George taught him to ride a bike, or when they baked pizza together at home. One evening, as Martha sat next to him, Thomas said quietly, "Mom, I remember how Dad laughed when we first got tangled in the ropes while fishing." We all laughed, and even he started saying that it was the best day of fishing ever, simply because we couldn't catch a single fish. Martha smiled, and even though her eyes were filled with tears, she felt how important it was for her to hear these memories. She could see that Thomas was slowly coming to terms with his loss, but at the same time finding some joy in it, in the memory of George. Thomas began to talk about his feelings, too, although it had been difficult before. He remembered how George had always supported him, even in difficult times when he didn't believe in himself. Now he felt that even though George could no longer support him physically, his words and love still lived on in him. Martha, listening to her son, felt her own heart lighten. She knew that this journey of recovery would be long and difficult, but these moments when they remembered George together gave her strength. She understood that memory is not only about loss, but also about how to survive and move on, not forgetting all the good that was. This month was not only a time of recovery, but also a time of discovery. They understood that even through pain, it is possible to find a way to a new reality, where the memory of George remains alive and with them, as part of their new life. One evening, as Thomas sat next to his mother on the couch, Martha looked at him and decided to share an important story from their past. She knew that sometimes it was difficult for both of them, but these memories could give them hope for the future. "You know, son, I still remember how we met your dad," Martha began, smiling. "It was in the library when I was younger and you weren't even born." Thomas looked up and smiled, interested in the story. "How was that?" he asked. Martha remembered the day she was returning a book and happened to meet George among the bookshelves. He was standing next to the history book she had just checked out, and he started talking about her favorite topics. She had always been a bit shy, but that day was different. He asked her out for coffee, and it was the best offer she had ever received. "I didn't expect it at all," Martha continued, "but he looked so confident that I couldn't say no. And we talked for an hour, although I don't remember what exactly afterwards. I felt happy, and I realized that this was the moment when everything changed." Thomas listened attentively, captivated by her words. He couldn't imagine what it was like to see his mother so young, so full of energy and life, and that was very important to him. "And how did you become a couple?" he asked. "Well, after that first time, we started seeing each other more and more," Martha said, smiling. "We spent time together, talking, laughing. I realized that I wanted to be with him. It was somehow natural. He became important to me, and I felt like I had found my soulmate." Thomas nodded, smiling. He hadn't always understood what it was like to love someone so much, but seeing his mother so strong and joyful at that moment made him feel like anything was possible. He felt that this moment, when his mother opened up to him about her story, was important for both of them. "You know, son, even when you were little, your father always said that family is not just about the people who are with you now, but also about the memories of those who were there and who left their mark on your heart," Martha said, her voice warm. "And even though he's not with us now, I will always carry him in my heart. We are what we experienced together." Thomas, listening to her, felt how deep in his heart there was still a place for George. He understood that even though he couldn't see him anymore, his father would always be a part of their lives. "Mom, I'll remember too," Thomas said. "I'll remember Dad, and when I grow up, I'll tell my children how wonderful he was." Martha looked at her son, and a tear welled up in her eyes, but she didn't hold it back. It was a tear of memory, of love, and of hope for the future. They were together, and that was all that mattered. That evening was another step toward recovery. Thomas began to understand that even though George was no longer with them physically, his memory lived on in their hearts and in every word, every laugh, every moment they shared. Every evening after a hard day, Thomas and Martha would gather at the dinner table. It became a kind of tradition, although at first it was difficult to imagine how to continue living a normal life without George. The dinner was quiet. After they had eaten, Martha cleared the table, and Thomas remained sitting at the table, looking out the window. His thoughts were far away, and he did not notice how night fell, covering everything with darkness. But it was in the darkness of the night that his struggle with dreams began. As soon as Thomas went to bed, his soul would plunge into another world, the world of dreams. It was a world where George was alive, and where they could be together again. In his dreams, they would walk through old places where he had fished with his father or worked together in the garden. Thomas would sometimes even smell the fresh grass or the sweet aroma that remained after cooking in their kitchen. But these dreams always changed, and often they became dreamy and bitter. In his dreams he could see George, but his father always stood at a distance, as if he could not get closer. Thomas wanted to hug him, but every time he took a step forward, George moved away. It was an endless cycle of searching, painful and hopeless. Sometimes in his dreams his father would smile, and Thomas would feel his heart fill with warmth. But the next day he would wake up with a heavy sense of loss. His father was gone, and he could not find the same sense of peace that he had once had. But even in his dreams there was hope. And although Thomas felt the pain at night that he could not be with George, he began to notice that with each new dream he found more strength to accept it. To accept that his father would leave a part of himself in him, a part of his love, his laughter, his guidance. Thomas would wake up early in the morning, feeling heavy again, but he knew that the next day would bring new opportunities. He no longer ran from the pain, although he had not yet found final peace. However, with each dream he felt that small steps towards recovery were already becoming a part of his life. And even if the pain did not recede, he began to accept that he would live with the memory of George.